In the summer of 1972, Yosemite National Park was alive with the hum of tourists, the scent of pine, and the distant roar of waterfalls. But beneath the beauty lurked a chilling mystery. Hikers vanished without trace along familiar trails. Tents were found untouched, backpacks abandoned, and footprints ended abruptly at cliff edges or dense forest. Families, friends, and park rangers were left grasping for answers, as whispers of foul play and darker forces spread among the visitors. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something or someone was stalking the vast wilderness of America's most treasured park, and it left behind only questions and silence. In the early summer of 1972, Yosemite National Park seemed like a sanctuary, a place where towering granite cliffs, thundering waterfalls, and verdant meadows promised adventure and escape. Tourists arrived in droves, drawn by the park's dramatic vistas and the sense of freedom it offered. Hikers set off along winding trails, children chased each other through open glades, and couples lingered on cliff edges, marveling at the grandeur of the natural world. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic scenery, a pattern of disappearances was quietly forming, one that would haunt the park for years to come. It began subtly. On the eastern side of Yosemite Valley, near the Panorama Trail, Robert and Elaine Thompson, a young couple in their mid-20s, were last seen leaving their campsite at dawn. They had spoken excitedly to fellow campers about their plans for a full day of hiking, but by evening they had not returned. Rangers found their tent intact, a small fire still smoldering, and backpacks neatly stowed as if nothing had ever been disturbed. There were footprints, yes, but they led only to the edge of the forest, vanishing as abruptly as the couple themselves. It was the first high-profile disappearance of the season, and it sent ripples of unease through the park. Soon, other cases began to emerge. James Calder, a solitary hiker in his early 30s, was reported missing near Vernal Fall. His friends recounted seeing him take photographs along the trail, documenting the beauty of cascading water and jagged cliffs. Later, when his camera was recovered at the base of the falls, the negatives that might have captured his last moments were gone. Search parties combed the area, calling his name through the dense pine forests and over the echoing rocks. But all that was found were a few scattered personal items: a hiking boot, a torn map, the occasional water bottle. Each disappearance seemed to follow a similar pattern. The individuals were experienced, careful and prepared, yet they vanished with little trace, leaving behind only fragments of their presence. Park rangers began to take notice, sharing stories that straddled the line between observation and fear. One ranger recounted hearing footsteps in areas where no one else was present, and seeing shadows move along cliffsides, only to find nothing when he approached. Another described a chill in the air, an unnatural drop in temperature that accompanied certain trails where hikers had disappeared. Even seasoned rangers accustomed to the unpredictable terrain of Yosemite felt an unexplainable tension, a sense that the park itself was watching, or perhaps that someone or something was moving deliberately within its vast expanse. Families of the missing wrestled with frustration and despair. The official investigations were painstaking but slow, hindered by the sheer scale and complexity of the park. Helicopters scoured the skies, but dense forests and deep valleys provided ample cover for those who vanished. Ground searches were no less challenging. The forest floor was dense with underbrush, and the cliffs and ravines were treacherous. In 1972, forensic science was limited, especially in rugged wilderness environments, leaving investigators to rely heavily on eyewitness accounts, trails of footprints, and the occasional abandoned personal item. As the disappearances mounted, the media began to take notice. Local newspapers reported on the sudden spike in missing persons, drawing attention to the hazards of the park and speculating on possible causes. Some stories hinted at the presence of a predator, someone who had learned to navigate the wilderness with sinister intent. Others suggested accidents, falls from cliffs, exposure to the elements. But the sheer frequency of the incidents, combined with the mysterious disappearance of entire groups, left many unsettled. Visitors began to whisper about the 1972 vanishings, sharing rumors in the parking lots and along trailheads. There was talk of hikers vanishing into the mists, of strange figures glimpsed at a distance, and of campfires left burning with no one nearby. For a park renowned for its natural beauty, these disappearances cast a shadow over every cliff and clearing. Each report, each account built upon the last, weaving a web of tension and dread that seemed to settle over Yosemite like an unseen fog. By midsummer, it became clear that 1972 was unlike any other season in the park's recent history. The vanishings were not isolated, and the pattern suggested an unknown force at work, something that could not be contained by park boundaries, maps, or search teams. Experienced hikers, locals familiar with every trail, and even park staff were all vulnerable, and the serene wilderness had revealed a dangerous and unpredictable edge that few could have imagined. The individuals who vanished in Yosemite during 1972 were far from ordinary park visitors. They were experienced hikers, families on vacation, and in some cases locals who knew the wilderness intimately. Each disappearance carried its own story, a life interrupted in the midst of adventure or routine, leaving behind loved ones desperate for answers. Among the first to vanish were Robert and Elaine Thompson, a young couple whose enthusiasm for exploration masked no hint of danger. Their preparations had been meticulous, maps carefully studied, supplies packed with precision, and each trail chosen for its scenic allure. They were not naive travelers. They understood the risks of the backcountry, yet the wilderness seemed to swallow them whole. James Calder, another figure lost to the park, embodied a different profile, a solitary hiker in search of solitude and photographic opportunity. Calder had spent months planning his route, bringing specialized equipment and documenting his intentions to friends. His disappearance was particularly baffling because his camera, when recovered, contained no negatives. Images that might have revealed his final movements were gone, leaving only speculation. Calder's case illustrated a chilling reality. Even those most knowledgeable about the park's dangers could vanish without trace. Families of missing children were plunged into deeper, more acute despair. In one instance, a 10-year-old boy vanished near a campsite while his parents were occupied with setting up tents. Witnesses later recalled seeing him chasing a butterfly toward the tree line, but by the time they looked again, he was gone. Rangers conducted extensive searches, scanning cliffs, ravines, and the dense pine forest, but found nothing. Items the boy had carried, water bottle, hat, small toy, were never recovered. The case was a stark reminder that Yosemite's beauty was matched by a subtle but implacable danger, one that could strip even the most careful family of its peace. Local guides and park employees were not immune. One ranger, Samuel Hargrove, described encounters with individuals who seemed familiar with the terrain, only to vanish before any conversation could take place. These were not the occasional misstep of naive tourists. These were people who should have known better, yet fell victim to the park's unseen hazards. Reports surfaced of hikers disappearing near well-traveled trails, those that had been marked and patrolled, creating an unsettling contradiction. Safety did not guarantee survival. Eyewitness accounts painted a portrait of confusion and fear. Hikers reported seeing strange figures at a distance, sometimes partially obscured by mist or shadow, who would vanish as soon as they were noticed. Some spoke of odd sounds in the forest, echoing footsteps, distant cries, or the soft rustle of movement where no one should be. These observations were difficult to validate, but were consistent enough to suggest that the disappearances were neither random nor purely accidental. The pattern pointed to a series of events that defied simple explanation, heightening anxiety among park visitors and authorities alike. Friends and relatives of the missing struggled to comprehend how someone so prepared could vanish. Letters, phone calls, and pleas for information flooded the local authorities and park offices, reflecting a growing frustration with the limitations of the investigation. Unlike urban disappearances where surveillance and witnesses might provide leads, Yosemite offered only wide-open terrain, unpredictable weather, and a labyrinth of forests and cliffs. The missing were often found only in memory and in the occasional eerie relic, a boot, a jacket, a camera, remnants that served as haunting proof of their existence. The human dimension of these vanishings made them particularly harrowing. Each missing person carried dreams, ambitions, and connections that were abruptly severed. A newlywed couple hoping to spend their first summer exploring the natural world, a child seeking adventure, a lone photographer chasing perfect light, all were absorbed into the park's quiet, inscrutable wilderness. Their stories revealed not just the danger inherent in Yosemite, but the fragility of human presence in a place both majestic and indifferent, where preparation could not guarantee safety. and where lives could vanish as silently as a shadow passing through the trees. The discovery of abandoned campsites, tents, and personal belongings became one of the most unsettling aspects of the Yosemite disappearances in 1972. Each scene seemed meticulously ordinary at first glance, as if nothing had gone wrong, but closer examination revealed the haunting truth. Someone had simply vanished. Rangers and search teams frequently stumbled upon these areas, often finding a fire still smoldering, food uneaten, and gear carefully stowed, untouched, as though the hikers had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and yet the absence was palpable, a silence that seemed to echo through the pine-scented air. Near the Panorama Trail, for instance, Robert and Elaine Thompson's campsite was a perfect example. Their tent remained taut and intact, their backpacks neatly placed beside it, and the small fire they had prepared for the evening still gave off wisps of smoke. Inside the tent, personal items were left in order, maps folded, water bottles full, and food containers untouched. It was as if the couple had planned to return at any moment. The sight was both comforting and chilling. Everything pointed to normalcy, but normalcy had betrayed them. No tracks led out from the tent toward the safety of the main trail, only a faint trail disappearing into thick forest undergrowth. The incongruity of meticulous preparation and sudden disappearance became a recurring motif across the park. Other discoveries were equally confounding. James Calder's camera, found at the base of Vernal Fall, contained no negatives despite the film being intact. A single hiking boot might be spotted near the edge of a ravine, sometimes perched precariously as if it had slipped from the wearer mid-stride. Torn maps or scattered water bottles suggested movement, but the movements were impossible to reconstruct. Items were left behind not out of carelessness but almost purposefully, hinting at a disruption that was abrupt and final. Each recovered object became a haunting artifact, a silent witness to the vanishing itself, raising more questions than answers. The layout and condition of these abandoned sites intrigued investigators. Rangers noted that tents were often closed or partially zipped, food left in its container, and fires left at a smoldering stage that indicated an interruption mid-task. It was as if the individuals had paused their routine for a moment and were never seen again. The uniformity of these scenes across multiple disappearances suggested a consistent pattern that defied conventional explanation. Unlike typical wilderness accidents where personal belongings might be scattered by a fall, a river, or wildlife, these items were arranged deliberately, creating an eerie tableau of normalcy that masked a violent or inexplicable vanishing. In addition, the locations of abandoned belongings often confounded logic. They were not necessarily on the most treacherous trails or hidden in obscure corners of the park. Sometimes they were in open clearings, near marked paths, or on slopes that had been traversed hundreds of times by other hikers. One abandoned backpack was found resting against a boulder near the edge of Mirror Lake, with no footprints leading to or away from it. The area was frequently traveled by other visitors who reported nothing unusual at the time. The contrast between accessibility and sudden disappearance amplified the sense of unease, making the park feel simultaneously familiar and alien. Eyewitness accounts from hikers who stumbled upon these abandoned sites added another layer of unease. Some recalled a strange stillness in the air, a heaviness that made conversation difficult. Others reported hearing faint sounds, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant echoes. But when they looked, the forest was empty. Even experienced rangers described a gut-level sensation of wrongness, a quiet they could not attribute to wind or wildlife. These abandoned belongings were not just objects. They were markers of absence, tangible proof of the inexplicable forces at play in Yosemite. The psychological impact on search teams and visitors was profound. Each abandoned campsite or tent became a place of speculation and dread. Volunteers combing the trails would often pause, staring at a neatly folded map or a scattered water bottle, imagining the final moments of the missing person, only to be confronted with the impossibility of the scene. For families, the sight of a loved one's backpack or jacket left in perfect order was both a cruel comfort and an agonizing reminder that they had vanished without a trace. The abandoned sites were silent, yet they spoke volumes of sudden disappearances, of lives interrupted, and of a wilderness that could hide its secrets behind the facade of ordinary routine. eyewitness accounts and observations from hikers, and park rangers painted a chilling and perplexing picture of the disappearances that plagued Yosemite in 1972. These accounts were often fragmented and anecdotal, but collectively, they suggested a pattern that went beyond ordinary wilderness accidents. Hikers recalled seeing figures in the distance, shadows that seemed to move with purpose, and glimpses of shapes that disappeared into the forest as quickly as they were noticed. Sometimes these figures appeared human. Other times, their movements were unnatural, almost gliding across the terrain in a way that defied explanation. The common thread was the same: a sudden, inexplicable presence followed by abrupt absence. Rangers, too, experienced moments that left them unsettled. Samuel Hargrove, a seasoned park ranger, described an encounter along the Glacier Point Trail. One evening, while checking a less-traveled path, he noticed a man standing perfectly still among the pines. Hargrove called out to offer assistance, expecting a lost hiker or camper, but the figure neither responded nor moved. When Hargrove approached, the man seemed to dissolve into the surrounding mist, leaving nothing behind. Such encounters were reported by other rangers, sometimes with small variations: a shadow that vanished, a figure glimpsed between trees, or footsteps heard where no one could logically have been. The consistency of these experiences lent credibility to what might otherwise have been dismissed as imagination or stress. Visitors themselves often noted a shift in the atmosphere around the trails where people vanished. Hikers recounted a sudden chill in the air, a damp heaviness, or an inexplicable silence that descended despite the usual sounds of wind and wildlife. One backpacker reported pausing to take in the scenery near Vernal Fall when he noticed that birds, squirrels, and even insects seemed absent from the area, as if the forest had gone temporarily lifeless. The sensation was so intense that he described feeling watched, a presence he could not identify before moving quickly along the trail. These environmental observations, while subtle, contributed to an overarching sense that Yosemite's wilderness held a layer of unpredictability that was almost sentient in its timing. Trail users also noticed the disappearance of familiar patterns in the terrain. Footpaths that had been heavily traveled would appear altered, with underbrush disturbed or ground subtly shifted, giving the impression of recent, secretive passage. Sometimes hikers reported finding personal belongings of missing individuals in locations that made no logical sense: shoes resting on boulders, water bottles near cliffs, or maps torn and partially buried. Witnesses who came across these items often experienced a sense of unease, a feeling that they were observing the remnants of events they could not fully comprehend. The accounts of hearing sounds without a source were particularly consistent. Campers near abandoned sites reported hearing faint, echoing cries, rustling leaves, or snapping twigs when no one else was in the vicinity. Some even spoke of a distant voice calling their name, prompting them to search for another hiker who had never been there. Such auditory experiences blurred the line between imagination and reality, adding to the mystery of the vanishings. Many of these observations were corroborated by multiple hikers who passed through the same areas over successive days, suggesting that the phenomena were not isolated incidents. Even small behavioral anomalies noticed by eyewitnesses became points of interest for investigators. Hikers sometimes described a feeling of being followed, a subtle shift in the environment that made them hyper-aware of the forest around them. Park rangers reported that search dogs occasionally reacted strangely, alerting to areas that appeared empty or ignoring obvious scent trails, as though some invisible factor disrupted their tracking abilities. These experiences, though difficult to quantify, created a mosaic of evidence hinting at a presence or force within the park that was both elusive and purposeful. The cumulative effect of these observations was a profound sense of unease among those who spent time in Yosemite. Visitors became cautious, rangers grew wary, and families of the missing were left grasping for explanations that did not exist. The eyewitness accounts did more than document strange occurrences. They painted a portrait of a wilderness that could conceal not only physical dangers, but an almost psychological threat, where perception, environment, and the inexplicable converged to create a haunting and unresolved mystery. As the disappearances in Yosemite mounted in 1972, speculation about their cause ran the gamut from plausible to fantastical. Investigators, park officials, and the public alike struggled to reconcile the frequency and nature of the vanishings with conventional explanations. Some leaned toward the possibility of a predator, someone who had learned to navigate the park's vast wilderness with methodical precision. The theory of a serial offender seemed plausible. Experienced hikers disappearing despite careful preparation, trails left meticulously maintained yet yielding no trace of their occupants, and gear found abandoned in patterns that suggested observation and calculated removal. The thought of a human predator, lurking unseen and striking without warning, unsettled both visitors and authorities. However, other explanations quickly entered the public imagination. Natural hazards were abundant in Yosemite, and accidents could happen even to the most skilled hikers. Steep cliffs, sudden rock slides, treacherous river currents, and unpredictable weather created a deadly environment. One hiker might slip on wet granite near Vernal Fall. Another could be caught in a flash storm along the higher trails. Exposure and hypothermia were constant risks, particularly for those venturing deep into the backcountry. Yet the lack of consistent physical evidence, bodies, torn clothing, or disturbed campsites, made these theories difficult to accept as the sole cause. Each disappearance appeared deliberate in its suddenness, yet no perpetrator or clear accident scene emerged. Adding another layer of mystery were the reports of unusual phenomena from both hikers and rangers. Some witnesses described fleeting shadows or figures moving unnaturally along the trails, sounds without identifiable sources, and sudden shifts in temperature or air pressure. A few accounts suggested that these disappearances might involve forces beyond human comprehension, hinting at the supernatural or paranormal. While authorities approached such reports with skepticism, the sheer volume and consistency of these observations made them impossible to dismiss entirely. The forest, long considered a neutral backdrop to adventure, seemed to take on an almost sentient quality, masking events from observation while revealing only fragments afterward. The investigative limitations of the era compounded the uncertainty. In 1972, forensic techniques were rudimentary compared to modern standards. DNA analysis did not exist. Surveillance cameras were rare in remote areas, and search and rescue operations relied heavily on manpower, trained dogs, and helicopters with limited visibility. Rangers conducted exhaustive sweeps of cliffs, valleys, and trails, yet large areas of the park remained virtually unreachable, with dense forests and hidden ravines providing countless hiding places. Each search yielded personal items like a backpack, a tent, or a water bottle, but rarely produced definitive evidence explaining the disappearances. Without forensic breakthroughs, every case grew colder, and each unanswered question intensified the sense of mystery. Some speculated that multiple factors might be at play, blending human malice with natural danger. Perhaps a predator exploited the inherent risks of the wilderness, taking advantage of moments when hikers were isolated or distracted. Or maybe the accidents and environmental hazards created conditions for disappearances that could easily be misinterpreted as deliberate. Others suggested psychological explanations, noting the pressure and stress of navigating unfamiliar terrain could lead to disorientation, panic, or irrational decisions that proved fatal. Yet even these theories struggled to account for the regularity and precision with which individuals vanished, leaving little to suggest confusion or error. Meanwhile, public fascination with the cases grew. Newspapers covered the disappearances extensively, highlighting both the human tragedy and the enigmatic circumstances. Tourists who planned trips to Yosemite began sharing warnings, recounting the experiences of friends or family members who had been touched by the mystery. Rumors proliferated about a stalker in the park, about uncharted paths, and about strange occurrences beyond explanation. Some visitors reported feeling observed, their presence acknowledged by unseen eyes in the forest. While these accounts blurred the line between fact and folklore, they reflected the collective anxiety that had settled over the park. Ultimately, the speculation surrounding the Yosemite vanishings became as compelling as the disappearances themselves. The combination of potential human predation, natural hazards, and unexplained phenomena created a web of possibilities, none of which could be confirmed. Each theory illuminated a different facet of the park's dangers, emphasizing both the unpredictability of the wilderness and the limits of human understanding. Investigators were forced to navigate between fact, conjecture, and rumor, struggling to construct a coherent narrative from fragments that seemed designed to resist explanation. The vast wilderness of Yosemite National Park presented extraordinary challenges for investigators in 1972, complicating every effort to understand the string of disappearances that had unsettled both visitors and officials. The park spans over 1,187 square miles, a rugged expanse of granite cliffs, dense forests, meandering rivers, and hidden valleys. Navigating even a small section of this terrain required significant expertise, yet search and rescue teams were often stretched to their limits. Helicopters scoured the skies for hours, but thick tree canopies, sudden weather shifts, and deep-shadowed ravines rendered aerial searches only partially effective. Ground teams faced equally daunting obstacles. Uneven trails, treacherous rock formations, and areas of near-impenetrable undergrowth slowed progress and reduced the likelihood of finding concrete evidence. Communication posed another significant hurdle. In 1972, radio technology was limited, and the mountainous terrain created dead zones where rangers and volunteers could not coordinate effectively. Teams often operated in isolation, relying on maps that did not fully account for the hidden gullies, cliff faces, and ravines that had proven fatal to hikers. Search efforts were meticulously planned, yet time was always against them. The longer a person remained missing, the more the wilderness could erase their traces. The dense forest floors, teeming with wildlife, ensured that footprints, discarded items, and other potential clues could be quickly obliterated. Within hours, subtle signs of human presence could disappear entirely, leaving only the empty landscape behind. The sheer unpredictability of Yosemite's environment amplified these challenges. Sudden storms could transform a manageable trail into a slick and dangerous slope. Rivers could rise without warning, sweeping away belongings and obscuring paths. Fog and mist reduced visibility to mere feet in some areas, making aerial observation nearly impossible. Even experienced rangers who knew the park intimately often found themselves navigating hazards that could disorient or endanger them. The dynamic, ever-changing terrain created a situation in which investigation was not simply a matter of following a trail, but of interpreting a landscape that itself seemed to resist understanding. Limited forensic resources of the era further hindered efforts. In 1972, DNA analysis did not exist, and fingerprinting was of limited utility in the wilderness context. Investigators could catalog abandoned items, boots, jackets, water bottles, tents, but drawing conclusions about what had happened was fraught with uncertainty. Some sites offered potential clues like footprints leading toward cliffs or hidden paths, but these were often inconclusive. Rangers could only estimate timelines or reconstruct last known movements, and any minor disturbance in the terrain, broken branches, animal activity, or wind, could compromise a fragile trail of evidence. Each disappearance became a puzzle with missing pieces, and investigators were left piecing together fragmented clues from environments that actively concealed them. Volunteer efforts, while vital, introduced another layer of complexity. Local hikers, friends, and family members often joined searches, motivated by desperation and concern. While their dedication was undeniable, coordination challenges and unfamiliarity with search protocols sometimes complicated official operations. Volunteers might inadvertently disturb footprints, move abandoned gear, or wander into unsafe terrain, adding further uncertainty to the investigation. The passion and urgency of these efforts highlighted both the human cost of the disappearances and the difficulty of imposing order on an inherently chaotic landscape. Even with the best efforts, large swaths of the park remained effectively unreachable. High cliffs, deep ravines, and dense undergrowth created natural barriers that limited both access and visibility. Areas where missing hikers might have sought shelter, or where evidence might have been left behind, were often inaccessible without specialized equipment. Rangers noted that many disappearances occurred near these challenging areas, reinforcing the idea that Yosemite's natural complexity was both a hiding place and a trap. Search efforts were also time-sensitive in ways that modern investigations sometimes overlook. The wilderness quickly reclaimed abandoned campsites, scattered personal items, and any subtle markers of human presence. Wildlife could carry away clothing or food containers. Rain could wash away footprints, and falling debris could obscure trails. As the days passed, the likelihood of recovering meaningful evidence diminished sharply. Investigators were racing not just against time but against the environment itself, a factor that made every disappearance more confounding and every case increasingly cold. Ultimately, the investigative challenges in Yosemite in 1972 underscored the park's dual nature, a breathtakingly beautiful wilderness that could simultaneously conceal, misdirect, and erase the presence of human life. The combination of expansive terrain, unpredictable environmental conditions, limited technology, and human factors made solving the disappearances extraordinarily difficult, leaving authorities with more questions than answers and contributing to the enduring mystery that still surrounds these cases. The disappearances of 1972 left an indelible mark on Yosemite National Park, shaping both its cultural lore and the way the park approached safety and visitor management. Families of the missing were forever altered, grappling with grief and uncertainty, while rangers and investigators carried the burden of cases that seemed to defy explanation. These vanishings became more than isolated incidents. They evolved into a collective memory that infiltrated conversations among hikers, local communities, and park staff. Stories were passed down like cautionary tales, whispered in visitor centers, shared around campfires, and circulated in newspapers, each retelling adding a layer of tension and dread that lingered over the park's serene landscapes. The disappearances also had a profound effect on park policies and safety measures. Rangers, previously accustomed to dealing primarily with lost hikers and natural accidents, began to adopt more systematic approaches to monitoring trails. Check-in and check-out systems for backcountry campers were tightened, with more rigorous logging of intended routes and expected return times. Search and rescue protocols were reviewed and expanded, emphasizing coordinated ground and aerial operations and improved communication channels. Lessons from 1972 influenced the development of safety briefings for visitors, educating them about the unpredictability of the wilderness, the importance of traveling in groups, and the necessity of preparedness even on well-trodden trails. These changes reflected a recognition that Yosemite's beauty came with inherent risk, and that human oversight alone could not guarantee safety. Beyond administrative changes, the events of 1972 seeped into the cultural fabric of Yosemite. Local lore embraced the mystery, blending documented facts with conjecture, rumor, and the eerie impressions reported by witnesses. Park staff would occasionally recount stories of hikers who had disappeared after noticing unusual shadows or hearing unexplained sounds in the forest. Tourists and guides began to speak in hushed tones about the vanishing trails, and certain areas of the park gained reputations for being particularly perilous or uncanny. Over time, these narratives created an aura of superstition and caution, shaping visitors' perceptions of the wilderness in subtle but enduring ways. The media's coverage of the disappearances further amplified their impact. Newspapers reported not only the events themselves, but also the enigmatic circumstances surrounding them. Tents left intact, food uneaten, footprints disappearing into dense forest, and strange figures glimpsed by hikers. Television coverage, though limited at the time, occasionally highlighted search efforts and interviews with rangers and family members, bringing national attention to the park and instilling a cautious fascination in the public. The attention underscored the tension between Yosemite as a symbol of American natural beauty and the park as a space where ordinary rules of safety and expectation could be upended in an instant. Psychologically, the events of 1972 had a lingering effect on park visitors and staff alike. Hikers became more alert to environmental cues, rangers more vigilant in monitoring trails, and families more cautious when planning trips. The disappearances introduced a heightened awareness of vulnerability in the wilderness, a recognition that preparation and experience could not fully protect one from the unknown. Even decades later, the memory of those missing individuals continued to influence behavior in the park, fostering a mixture of respect, wariness, and reverence for the raw power of Yosemite's landscape. For law enforcement and search personnel, the cases underscored the limitations of investigative capacity in remote environments. The lessons learned in 1972 informed future training, resource allocation, and coordination with volunteers, emphasizing the necessity of a multifaceted approach to wilderness search operations. While technology and techniques have evolved significantly since then, the experiences of that year remain a touchstone for evaluating the challenges inherent in managing a national park of Yosemite's scale and complexity. Finally, the legacy of these disappearances persists in the stories that continue to circulate among hikers, historians, and true crime enthusiasts. Names like Robert Thompson, Elaine Thompson, and James Calder remain etched into the narrative of Yosemite, representing both the human cost of wilderness exploration and the enduring allure of mystery. Their stories remind visitors and park staff alike that even in a landscape celebrated for its beauty and grandeur, the forces of nature, chance, and possibly human or unknown intervention can intersect in ways that defy understanding, leaving traces that linger long after the hikers themselves have vanished. As the shadows of Yosemite's trails linger in your mind, ask yourself, how many disappearances go unnoticed, swallowed by forests that have watched centuries pass? Robert and Elaine Thompson, James Calder, and countless others vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of their existence and the silent testimony of abandoned gear and empty campsites. Their stories are more than mysteries. They are echoes of a wilderness that holds its secrets tightly, daring us to understand what cannot be explained. If this story left you unsettled, curious, or haunted, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Could there be something more at play? An unseen presence, a predator, or the wilderness itself asserting its unknowable power? We want to hear your theories, your reflections, your questions. Every comment becomes part of the conversation, part of the hunt for answers in the shadows of history. And if you crave more journeys into the forgotten, the unexplained, and the darkest corners of our past, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and step with us into the next story where truth and mystery collide. The wilderness is patient, the past is watching, and there are more secrets waiting just beyond the trail.